Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to make a very simple, short, and to-the-point guide. A lot of people have been asking me constantly, and have been asking just the community in general, what should I craft? Because of the recent nerfs that, have really given some of the players who are pretty short on supplies when it comes to deck building in Hearthstone quite the big boost, and now they want to know what they should craft. What should I play? What should I make? I'm sitting on all this dust, and I'm a player who really needs the cards to succeed. So in this video, I want to go on and talk about, it is my opinion, but I think it is a quite fair opinion on the legendary cards that will see the most use now and in the future. Now, one thing to note is that while there are a decent amount of legendaries that are still quite powerful from the TGT set, and of course the League of Explorers set, because that set is dropping from standard, and I'm mostly talking about standard cards here, you're not going to get as much use for crafting those cards. So to go off on the list, I want you guys to keep in mind that the cards you're going to get the most use out of are going to be ones in the classic set. So even though some of the classic set legendaries are not the best ones, if they're about as good as some of the new cards and some of the older cards in the standard set, they're probably more worthwhile to craft, especially if you're watching this video, because you're probably one of those players that does have to make tough choices on which cards to craft and which ones not to. So I have my Tier 1 legendaries here. Tier 1 includes Sylvanas. I think Sylvanas might be the go-to legendary to craft. There haven't been any super powerful legendaries in the new expansion aside from Cthulhu, and you do get Cthulhu for free by just playing the game. So Sylvanas is very powerful on one hand because it actually counters Cthulhu. Your opponent cannot realistically play Cthulhu into Sylvanas because on 10 mana they can't do anything else, and if Cthulhu kills Sylvanas, they get Cthulhu to attack the player who played Cthulhu immediately. And that's like game losing, okay? So Sylvanas just counters a very popular and very powerful archetype. We just had Silences nerfed, and, that's a pretty big deal for Sylvanas. And also Sylvanas is just generally pretty good. It was regarded as like top 3-ish legendaries throughout the history of Hearthstone, more often than not. And here we are in a situation where all the better ones kind of moved out of standard, and Sylvanas sits with fewer counters and more counters on its side. So Sylvanas probably is going to be the go-to craft legendary moving forward. But that doesn't mean that you need to make Sylvanas because, there are a few other factors at play. The other Tier 1, this is the second and final Tier 1 legendary for crafting, in my opinion, is the Twin Emperor Voeckler. So, of course, this only applies if you enjoy playing Cthulhu decks, and you might not, and if you don't, you definitely should not play this guy. But Twin Emperor Voeckler is a super powerful legendary. You just get ridiculous stats if you're playing a Cthulhu deck. Some Cthulhu cards have the requirements of having the 10 attack on Cthulhu, and they're kind of a bit inconsistent because they're only good on the early stages of the game, but usually if you're playing a Cthulhu deck, you meet this requirement on turn 7 almost no matter what. I've had only like 5 Cthulhu buffs in the whole deck, and almost every single game I can play this guy, if not on turn 7, maybe on 8. And if that's the case, you can even play this guy on turn 10. He's still great. He's fantastic. Getting the double taunt on the board, it's just like it fits the perfect point in the game. It fits the perfect stats. So anything that your opponent plays that would kill this in one hit is usually something you deal with hard removal. So you hard remove the really big minions, you leave the small and medium-sized ones, and Voeckler completely annihilates those. So it's extremely powerful. It also synergizes with fun cards like Evolve. You can get 2 random 8-drops for 8 mana, which is, there's not that many bad 8-drops. It's just playing a really good 8-drop, and then you have another card, 0 mana cost. If you play an 8-drop this turn, get a random 8-drop. So that's pretty good. Okay, there's a lot of synergy and a lot of power in this card if you are intending on playing Cthulhu decks. Tier 2 is all classic legendaries, but they're classic class legendaries, but this has a very important twist. So first I have Tirion Fordring. Yes, you have to like to play Paladin to actually craft this guy, but from our experience in the history of Hearthstone, every single Paladin deck that is not an face Divine Favor Paladin, if it's not that, you are playing Tirion Fordring, which means that it's, in the history of Hearthstone, it's probably in the 90s in how often it's included in the top tier Paladin lists, and a Paladin has been traditionally quite powerful in Hearthstone. So if you're a Paladin player, you're making a pretty good decision crafting Tirion. And Tirion is part of the classic set, so it will always be useful in standard, and it will always be powerful enough to play in wild as well. Then we have Van Cleef. Now this might be a little bit of a weird one, because in the history of Hearthstone we've seen this card often not included in some of the rogue lists, but the rogue lists that did not include Van Cleef have been traditionally ones that kill your opponent with specific combos. And even some of those include Van Cleef. But those combos heavily relied upon giant weapons, giant weapon buffs, which are not really available anymore, and Blade Flurry being what it was and is no longer. So those style of rogue decks are kind of leaving. Well, they just suck, I guess, is a more blatant way to put it. And the rogue decks that involve a lot more minion combat and a lot of like super efficient removal and cards, those type of rogue decks are the ones that are, kind of starting to dominate. And Van Cleef plays very well into every single version of those. So if you are a rogue player, Van Cleef is a legendary to craft. It's gonna be good, it has been good, and you can play in every format and every standard going forward. Similar note on Archmage Antonidas. Archmage Antonidas is included in almost every single mage deck. Very powerful card, don't need to explain it. Even in the aggro decks, it's played just as when you're running out of steam, you save a few crappy spells and bam, you have your late game all in one card. Very powerful card if you plan on playing mage. Tier 3 is kind of like if you kind of have most of the other legendaries and you're quite happy and you still want to make some stuff, this is where you start looking at these. So the Black Knight saw some play in this patch, as a lot of people are playing taunt minions. It's still, though, kind of marginal, I would say. It has the plus side that it's classic, that it's neutral, that it can fit in almost every single deck, but you just kind of have to be wary, because if you're not playing against taunt minions, it's a pretty bad card, particularly if you're playing against an aggressive opponent. So there is a bit of a cost, that's why we don't see it too much. Harrison Jones is also tier 3. He's a very good card if the situation calls for it. I would say that right now is one of the only times where there are very few good decks playing super powerful weapons. And that means that Harrison Jones kind of doesn't see as much play as you would think, but still it is a card that immediately when the top deck in ladder has a weapon, you will put this guy in your deck. He's neutral, he's classic, you get it, it's a pretty good card. Then we have Bran Bronzebeard. The problem with Bran is, well, he's going to leave standard pretty soon, and yeah, that's that's a pretty big downside. But Bran Bronzebeard has been making a lot of lists recently. He's almost an auto-include in most Cthulhu decks, and he's pretty damn good just overall in most other decks. It's a very highly played card right now, with the downsides that, if you are a standard player, soon enough, he will not be. And then I have Fandral Stogham. Okay, I was a little bit wrong on this card. I thought this card completely sucked. It doesn't completely suck. It's a pretty good card. It's a card that if you like playing Druid, you will probably end up playing a decent portion of your Druid decks moving forward for the next 2 years or so if you're playing the standard format. And N'Zoth. N'Zoth is probably one of the best old gods here that we've seen. The main issue is that there aren't that many powerful death rattle effects right now, but I feel like there's maybe just enough in a certain set of decks, so you probably will play him a little bit right now, and in a few different classes, because he's neutral, of course, but I also feel that with just a few more decent death rattle minions, he's going to be very powerful. And the reason I think we're going to get those death rattle minions is Blizzard's not going to be afraid to produce them. When GVG goes out, when Nax goes out, a lot of the death rattle synergistic effects kind of get removed, and a lot of super powerful death rattle minions kind of get removed as well. So I think we're going to see a decent amount more death rattle minions, as we saw in this expansion. But if you look at like the Grand Tournament, we didn't see too many death rattle cards at all. I think that will change specifically because of this shift and the standard format. So that's about it. Of course, if you get any other legendaries, you enjoy playing them, you want to make them work, just keep your cards. But the idea is, if you're looking for something to craft, it probably should be on this list if you don't have the card already. And if you're looking to disenchant some legendaries to craft something else, if it's on this list, you probably should think twice. I hope I've been of help, and I'll see you guys later.